Welcome back to another episode of the Commercialisation of Sports series with me, Anthony Morrissey, the CEO and founder of AMSC, or AM Sports Consultancy, whichever way I want to say it out loud. Delighted to have you all on board. Delighted to have you here. I'm back in Gothenburg, back relaxing myself after a trip back to Ireland and going different places and going around to seeing different things and bringing back some nice memories, going to lovely stadiums that is in Ireland and watching some amazing sport as well. So we won't talk about the Rugby World Cup. It gets me upset, but we will talk about other things in this. Uh, as I said, there's loads of things happening at the moment in the world of sport, and no better person to talk to than the guest that I have with you today. I can't wait to have on. I'm delighted to have him on because wherever I seemed to go when it came to the commercialization of sport working at Munster, his name seemed to pop up everywhere. There was websites coming through. There was information going through. And I remember my old boss, Enda Lynch, was raving about it when I first joined Munster, that I had to get in touch with this guy. So I'm delighted that he's able to come onto the show now. So instead of doing anything and talking and listening to me babble on, I'll invite him on. Rob Hartnett, how are you doing?
Thanks very much, Anthony. God, you'd make me blush now listening to that intro, but thank you very much.
No, it was. I must admit, when I first joined Munster, it was one of the first things way back. I remember getting an email from yourself when you starting up Sport for Business back in 2011, I think it was. It was roughly the same time I was starting at Munster, and it was just cool to watch your journey, if I'm honest, and see the growth of what you guys have done and the fantastic work you got to. We get to that in a second. We'll go right back to the very start because I like to do this with this show and have a conversation about where the passion for sport came from, because vast majority of people that I talk to always say it's to do with their family or friends, or it's to do with a specific moment in their life. For you, it's unique to you. Where did your love for sport come from?
Cool. It's genetic. It's in the DNA. My dad was a huge hurling and rugby fan. He was from Tipperary, went to school in Mungret, and was passionate about supporting both Ireland and Munster, as it happens. Himself and my mum were in Aer Lingus, so they were over in London when I was born, and I was born only 12 days after the World Cup final at Wembley. So I'm very old now. But England have never won the Football World Cup in my lifetime, And so, look, I was born into sport. We were sporty as kids. We grew up playing football, playing tennis, playing all sorts of things. I remember being brought, my first big sports event was being brought onto the terraces at Loftus Road to see a QPR against West Ham game when I was very young, and my ears were not prepared for the kind of language and exhortations that you'd hear from the terraces. But my dad was grand, and my mum was fine with it. It's all part of growing up. So so sport pretty much all the way through. My grandfather was actually a jockey, and so was his great-grandfather. And my great-grandfather rode the Derby and Oaks double back in 1915, would you believe? The next person to do that was Kieran Fallon, sort of, almost 100 years afterwards. And then my grandfather rode the winner of the Galway Hurdle when it was a very heavily backed 9-4 favourite. So it's just as well he won, or I might not be here. But I came into sport, from the family and from my own personal love of it. When I was a kid, when I was 8 years old, I decided that I wanted to be a journalist, and I never deviated from that. So I realized that I was probably never going to be good enough to become a professional sports person. And, in those days, it wasn't even really a thing. Like, professional sport, was lads playing football, generally lads. And after they retired, they'd go and they'd become a postman or a milkman or something else. So, always wanted to be in journalism, and got a break working with LBC Radio in London after graduating from UCD with a history and politics degree. Got into sport, kept in sport, deviated a little bit into the gaming and the gambling business, but never far from the sort of the beating heart of sport. And I guess one of the highlights of that was that I was running the sponsorship of the Cheltenham Gold Cup. So my great-grandfather and my grandfather would have been very proud.
Yeah.
It was, it was special. And I was doing that when I was still in my 20s. And I was lucky. I always kind of had the perfect job. And then after about 3 or 4 years, I decided that perfect wasn't quite right for me at that time. So I'd move on, and most people thought I was mad, but I'm happy with where I've got to in life. I'm happy with where I've got to now in establishing sport for business. Just generally a happy soul.
Yeah, look, I think that's a fabulous story. It's also very apt for so many people I asked that question to have pointed back to their families and their connection with their family. No one, and delighted as answered, oh, it was when such and such scored a try, or when such and such scored a point, or whatever. It was always connected to a feeling and a moment. And when you think of sport back when you're kids, and I'm delighted, I'm a West Ham fan for my sins. So the fact that your first ever game was QPR versus West Ham, and I've been in both stadia. Can you remember your feeling? I know you remember the language in the different language, but can you remember the feeling when you walked into Loftus Road that first time, and the feeling of just, was it a feeling of joy, or was it a feeling of trepidation, or can you remember what it was like just to be, let's say, your dad and that whole experience?
It would have been very exciting. In fact, it wasn't my dad that brought me. I think it was my mum that brought me. Fair play to her. She was well ahead of the game, and you know, Loftus Road then, probably not much different to Loftus Road now. It wasn't a shining palace of a sporting stadium. I've been into a few that have been better since then. Thankfully, I've even been into a few that have been a little bit worse. But yeah, look, it stirs you in a way that Andy Farrell said at the weekend. He said, like, this is living, and regardless to whether you win or you lose, that's perhaps at the end of the day the least important part of sport. I have an incredibly deep sort of love and passion for people who are playing sport, myself, but also it's kind of, it's like war without guns, which in the current climate is perhaps more important than ever before. It's the thing which is the most important thing in your life, right up until the point where it isn't. And if you win, it's great. If you lose, there's always tomorrow. And I love that about sport. I love the fact that you can become so invested in it. You can get so completely lost in the moment that you can really feel as though, my wife laughs at me when I talk about, how did we do today? And it might be the New England Patriots, or it might be QPR. And she says, what's this we business? And you just do that. Like, you're so invested across so many different sports, and thankfully, God, I've been so lucky and privileged to be able to, sort of visit the top table, to actually talk to the people who are making it happen, and it is absolute privilege.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. My wife would have the same conversation, wondering why I'm up on a Monday night at 4 a.m. watching the Chicago Bears getting beaten. And she doesn't understand why I'm then awakened 2 hours later with my young son. And she's just, it doesn't make sense to her, if I'm completely honest with her. And looking back, before I move further towards your professional life, was there a hero of yours when you were growing up, and that you could sit back and go, that was the guy or the girl that you sat there and went, that was someone I really, really looked up to?
God, there was probably so many of them. I mean, bear in mind now that this was back in the days when we used to wait for, CFAX to produce the up-to-date football results, and content as we know it today didn't exist. So you didn't get to really inside the skin of any of the superstars. But I always loved American football. I couldn't explain why, but I still love it to this day. It's one amongst the many sports that gives me a huge buzz. Back in those days, Stan Bowles was a huge hero. QPR always had those kind of really silky, skilled, slightly flawed characters, and maybe that was what was appealing. And then away from it, because I always wanted to be a journalist, I always had this absolute fandom for Peter O'Sullivan, who became Sir Peter O'Sullivan. And many that are watching or listening might not remember, but he was the absolute golden voice of horse racing on the BBC. And when I started to work in the racing game and the gaming side of things, I actually got to meet him. I actually got to have dinner with him in his apartment in London with himself and his wife. And again, they say never meet your heroes. Rubbish. Yeah, meet your heroes and remember it well if you're ever so lucky enough. So yeah, loads of heroes, and there's new ones being created every day.
Yeah, I think that's what makes for me, and I put it out on a newsletter I did today about the Irish national team and how that was announced, the Irish women's team going to the World Cup, and how brilliantly that was announced. Where you had a little kid kicking the ball against the wall, and she's naming the players. So instead of naming Messi or Ronaldo or whoever, she's naming Katie McCabe or whoever she's naming. And I think that was beautifully done. That was smartly done. It's a good example of how you can activate your sponsorship or activate the team and grow the team, because it gives an idea of exactly what you're trying to achieve.
A
You
new
said
day dawning was the
a
music to
new
it.
day dawn. Yes, even better.
And I was, again, lucky enough. I got to interview Vera Pauw on stage last year for a half an hour, and Vera was great. Like, she's very Dutch, so you kind of, if you meet her for a minute, she'll come across as being, quite Dutch. But then we just got into a rhythm and a groove, and the conversation was absolutely brilliant. So that team was very special. Still is, even though Vera has moved on now. Eileen Gleeson coming in, she's a brilliant follow up in this interim basis. Can't wait to see who comes in with the job on a permanent full time setting. But yeah, the women's sports side of it is something that we've been really driving pretty hard now for all of the existence of Sport for Business. It was just something that, in my mind's eye, I have two boys and two girls, and I wanted them to have equal opportunity. And 10 years ago, they didn't really have that when they were coming out of school. And now I think they do, and we might have played some small part, very small part in that. But yeah, so that team was special. That was a great team reveal.
I also think, and moving into the conversation you said there about women's sport and about the importance of that from a branding perspective, I think you've seen a lot of brands in the last few years jump on board, but not jump on board for the sake of jumping on board and adding value. And I think that's the most important thing when it comes to brand and getting involved with commercialization of sport is to add value, not just to throw your name on a jersey and walk away and say, what was that worth? It's actually to connect and link in together. I think Sky did it with the soccer team. I think Lidl have done it definitely with GAA, and there's a vast array of visions of that. When you first started Sports for Business back in 2011, you said it there a second ago, there was a big difference. Would that be the number one, that the level of women's sport that it's grown within branding exercise? Or is there something else that pops into your mind when you think of the massive difference between what it was like in 2011 to now?
Like that we should live in interesting times. I mean, this past decade, to be talking about the commercial world of sport in Ireland and further afield has given me a ringside seat to the greatest period of change that you could ever imagine. Back in 2011, YouTube was kind of a thing. Social media was kind of a thing. I remember seeing the England football squad named for the 2010 World Cup on Twitter about 2 hours before it was formally named, because it was, the rumors were swirling around, and then there was a couple of people that nailed it, and they got it absolutely right. And I kind of thought, wow, this is different. This is something which is way beyond the kind of top of the hour news bulletins that we're used to in sport. And so there has been so much change in that COVID has brought about. Like, now there isn't a sporting event that you would want to see that you can't see on your mobile phone. Streaming has just completely exploded and taken over. So to say one thing over another has been the most significant change, God, that'd be almost impossible. But you're absolutely right. In terms of the impact on the greatest number of people and the ability to bring new people that never had the opportunity into sport at a very equal level, that rise of women's sport has been incredible. Sport was designed back in the day by men. It has been run for most of its 150-year organized history by men, and men have benefited from it. That locker room culture, that ability, as I said earlier, to come together, to really bond incredibly over something that's massively important, and then to move back into the real world, but to have taken some of that experience with you. And why should that be restricted to 49.8% of the world? So I think it's great. Like, one of the things that has stuck out to me most, and I have a lot of conversations. I talk a lot to a lot of people, and conversation on the side of a football pitch where somebody in the Dublin Ladies Gaelic Football Association told me that there was more teams entered in the Dublin Minor Ladies Football Championship this year than there were in the boys. And back in 2011, that was impossible. That could never have been even imagined. And those changes, like, yes, it's a great sport, but Lidl have been a huge driver of that. I remember being at the launch of Lidl's sponsorship, and it was after a period where there was a lot going on, and Lidl came into this and they spoke about a huge investment, a lot of money going into this sponsorship, and somebody from within ladies football collared me afterwards and said, this would be no good for us. Like, they're talking about all of this money, but there's hardly any money going into the sport. It's all just going to be on advertising, and they'll just be advertising their own brand. And rarely did a comment miss the mark so widely as that, because it was those adverts. It was Sinead Goldrick being driven into the mud and then getting up, staring down the camera. That's what inspires young girls and older girls to think, actually, that looks like a bit of crack. That looks like a bit of fun. I'm going to do that. Now we've got equality, and there's still a journey to go in a lot of different areas. But in terms of the biggest single change that impacts on the biggest single group of people, women's sport have got to be the one.
Yeah, for me, living in Sweden, when I first came here 6 or 7 years ago, I used to find it amazing that my father-in-law would say to me, "Come on, we'll go to a game." And it was only when we actually arrived at the game did we know whether it was a men or a women's game, because that's the level of intensity they have over here. And I was so proud to see that change in Ireland the last few years. I just think it's been fantastic. And now people look at specific sports. You look at boxing, for example, and people talk about the Irish people in boxing. It's straight away, it's Katie Taylor, and it's very much kind of like looked up in that esteem, and people are looking at it rather than saying, "Oh, well, Katie Taylor's a female boxer and such and such is a male boxer." It's very much boxing the sport. Who is the best representative of Ireland in boxing the sport? Then that's who we're going to go and support and going to go and watch. And that's an experience to go and watch a Katie Taylor fight. It's an experience to go and watch any of those experiences across a variety of different Irish sports. I'm immensely proud, being an Irish person abroad, to be able to show to my Swedish friends and my Swedish family, look what we can do. Look what we can do on our little island.
Yeah, completely. And it's across so many sports as well. You've got like Rachel Blackmore in racing.
Yeah.
You've got Ellen Keane in the Paralympics. You've got Katie McCabe. You've got all of the footballers. You've got the rugby players. You've just got so many different sporting women. Leona Maguire, like Solheim Cup destroyer,
superstar.
It's fabulous to see.
When you said yourself at the start that you were 8 years old and you decided, I want to be a journalist at 8, can I ask you a question? Where did that come from?
Oh, God. I don't know. I guess I always liked writing, even as a kid. And funnily enough, it wasn't actually sport. I was watching the news one night, and there was a civil war going on in Africa, and they had these kind of little diagrams, literally sort of probably written on the back of an envelope and held up to a camera to indicate, how the movements and things like that were going. And then they cut to this journalist, and bizarrely, God only knows what kind of an upbringing I had, but as an 8-year-old, I just wanted to be that person. I wanted to be talking to a camera and breaking news. And it never left me. I've been in and around the edges. I do a lot of writing now, and I'm a kind of a part-time journalist, part-time networker, part-time CEO, part-time this, that, and everything else, part-time chair of Dublin City Council Sports Partnership, and all sorts of different things. But at its heart, I get up very early every morning, and I write our daily morning bulletin that goes out. And I just love that. I bounce out of bed every morning. And I love the ability of, either putting a pencil to a page or putting my fingers to a keyboard and helping to tell a story. I just love it.
Yeah, I just find that brilliant. Well, you then went from the 8-year-old, you went through your college, you got involved in, as you said, involved in sport a little bit. Was sport always something as you were growing up that the journalist and the sport thing mixed, or was it, as you said earlier, that you had a history and political connection? Was it more that you almost fell into sport, or how did you first get your first real, what you think, other than the break you said earlier on, that was kind of like, this is where I want to be?
It was there was a friend of the family who had been the horse racing correspondent with LBC Radio in London, and I'd been living back in Dublin at that stage. We were living in Malahide, and I'd gone through UCD, but then in the late 1980s there were no jobs here. It was either turn left to go to New York or Boston, or turn right to go to London, and I chose to go right. And so I was doing a variety of the usual kind of jobs that that young men do when they go to a foreign city, selling advertising space and knocking on doors. And then this role came up that he had gone, a guy called Colin Turner, he'd gone down to Channel 7 in Australia, and they never backfilled his position. So I rang him, and then he rang a guy called David Luddy, who was the producer at the time. And he said, "You've never got anybody in for that racing gig. There's a young fella who I know, and I know his family really well. He'd be worth having a chat with." So I had a chat with him, and he asked me what experience I had in radio broadcasting. And thankfully, quick as a flash, I realized that Radio Sunshine and Radio Nova and various different pirate radio stations will need to do a Wikipedia sort of reference search for anybody watching this that has no idea what we're talking about. That those radio stations had gone out of business at the time. So I blindly and baldly said to David Luddy, "Yeah, I used to do a lot of sports reports for these stations back in Dublin," knowing that he could never check.
Brilliant.
Yeah, went to Newbury Racecourse, was asked to ring in a report on what was the Hennessy, a big national hunt race, which is on around about this time of the year. And I went, picked up the phone, spoke. One report became 2 reports, became 10 reports, became a job at Ladbrokes, became the rest of the career as it progressed.
That's fascinating. I love that story about the ability at the moment. Because I'm sure anyone that's watching this has been in an interview when you're asked a question and you're like, "Oh, that's the question I didn't want them to ask because that's the little gap in my CV." To have the brains to do that so quickly, I'm in awe of that answer. I'll be completely honest.
Never ever lie in an interview unless it can't be proved.
Yeah, it's not lying. It's embellishing what could potentially have been the truth. The other thing I was going to say then is moving into towards the future and where people see sport long term down the road. We've spoken there about there's so much change over the last 10 years, so much evolution that's happened within sport and how people consume sport now, which means brands would look at the consumption of sport completely differently than when they would have in my father's day, who watching the Five Nations, if we want to go back to really back time, I remember watching it where he cut off all the windows, almost have the curtains down, have his little poof that he'd bang for whatever he wanted to do. And it was just a 100% focus on the TV, and pretty much no one was allowed in to watch that outside of myself. To now where I will be able to watch an American football game on Twitter, I'll be able to watch it on the TV, I'll have loads of other games to the left of me, loads of other, maybe even different sports to the right of me. Where do you see the next steps? Because it's evolved so quickly and it moves so fast. What do you think is coming down the tracks for sport over the next 2 to 5 years?
There are so many pathways that it might go. Just before I go on to that, I love that linear kind of history of Sporting connection. When that penalty went against Ireland in the World Cup quarterfinal, I upended the poof that I was beating through those 30 odd phases of play. So, history keeps on repeating itself. I love history.
If my father was there, if my father was with you, he'd have had a separate. It was a little green poof as well, as what my mother had made, and it was one of those ones that. How it wasn't destroyed. I remember one of our dogs bit into it one time, and we all were terrified because it was like this is up there with his kids, really. If I'm honest, sorry, it's tough to you.
Yeah. No, my kids are more important than the poof. I can. But where is sport going? I think what we're going to see is adaptation. I think that we have to recognize that if you just stay in the same lane all the time, that you will get overtaken. And sport is no different. We've got younger generations that are coming up now who were born into the era of the mobile phone, whose it's not that their attention span is too short. It's just what it is. Like, people aren't tuning in, even for for a World Cup semi-final. The number of people that wouldn't necessarily have been watching the full 80 minutes of that and really buying into the whole narrative from the first kick to the last, to the last tackle. A lot more people, like millions more people, will have been consuming it in terms of the highlights. We've kind of always known, like, match of the day is the best way to watch the English Premier League. You can't really be sitting down and watching 90 or 100 minutes of Premier League football, week in, week out, hour in, hour out. But match of the day is brilliant because it gives you the best bits. And I think that it's actually going to go beyond that. I said earlier on, I love the NFL, and I love watching the Red Zone program on Sky Sports on a Sunday night. And that's the same. That's just zeroing in on all of the really good bits that are happening. And I think there's going to be more and more of that. I've got a sense that the Premier League is going to be becoming its own broadcaster in either the next cycle or possibly the one after that. I think what the GAA has done with GAA Go is a global market leader in that. Like, they were already working with the URC TV, producing that sort of technology that we can dip in and dip out. We watch television on demand now. Sport has always been kind of appointment to view, largely because of social media, largely because of the social side of it. But again, that's changing. Nobody watched Drive to Survive. Nobody watched Full Swing. Nobody watches Hard Knocks all together at the same time. We watch it at a time to suit us, and you can see it. In golf. I love golf as a sport. I love all sports, but golf in particular is changing rapidly, and ESPN have bought the rights now to the new kind of format of sort of much shorter, much snappier golf. Shane Lowry is going to be involved. Rory McIlroy is going to be involved. They're still going to be playing in the majors. They're still going to be playing on the tour, but they're also going to be playing in this new, variant of the sport, which is going to capture eyeballs. And a round of golf, which might take you 4.5 or 5 hours on a golf course, it's of another era, and there will always be a demand for it. But the greater demand is going to be to go out and maybe play 3 holes or 6 holes or a bit of pitch and putt, something that's a little bit shorter that allows you to fit in so many different things in your life. So, this is nothing new. Like, sport has always adapted. There's more people play 5-a-side football than play 11-a-side football around the world. We don't necessarily do it in a Premier League status, but we still play the sports that adapt to suit the way that we live. And the way that we live is changing all the time. So sport will change all the time as well.
I also think when you were explaining that, I was thinking straight away of cricket. And cricket is a historical sport which is played by a vast array of countries around the world. And it was a 5-day test series, and they saw it dying. And then they created, not T20 was the last one, but they created, I think it was the 1-day internationals and stuff like that. Now it's down to T20, and now it's just a bash sport, which is fascinating to watch, even if you're not into cricket. But if you watch that T20 versus a test match, you also then have, as you said, 7-a-sides, rugby as well, and then now you're getting tag rugby. I think it's in the Olympics. I think I saw that a couple of days ago, going to be announced. So again,
if you look at the Olympics and you look at the sort of the way that the major sports have come, again, referencing the earlier conversation, you can't get into the Olympics unless you've got a men's and a women's version of it, which I think is brilliant. Way ahead of its time. But you've got rugby, sevens. You've got cricket, T20. You've got, sports that are adapting all of the time. You've got flag football coming into Los Angeles. Now, that's probably not going to make it beyond that. It's just a one-off for the American audience. But that's a version of American football which is playable by the masses and which is easier to understand, and it's quicker. And once the Olympics casts its halo over a sport like that, then it's a big winner.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's fascinating as well for people who wouldn't necessarily historically have been involved in sport, but would be watching it in a different way and consuming it in a different way. And now it becomes entertaining. And I think things are gone away from necessarily I'm supporting West Ham or QPR or Tottenham or Liverpool or whoever. It's now I'm supporting Lionel Messi, or I'm supporting a specific individual player as well. I think that's a real push on, and brands and Brands definitely can get involved in that. Just before I move on to my last topic, I would be remiss of me to ask you this question. Sport for business, when you thought of it and came up with the idea of it and the concept of it, what was the goal of it when you walked in and pressed go to start with? What was the little gap you'd seen, or what was it you'd have looked at? And has that, I'm assuming that has massively changed to now, but where was the thought process behind Sport for Business?
As a sponsor, and I'd worked with some great brands and had worked with Dermot Desmond in Betdac back here in Dublin. That was what brought me back to Dublin back in 2001. And we had been involved in sponsorship of the Gold Cup, so many different areas. And I'd seen and always been interested in sponsorship. And the one thing that I saw, and speaking to people realized that it was the case, was that oftentimes the conversations that would take place between a sponsor and a rights holder would be very intense up until the point that the contract was signed, and then would kind of be almost fearful for the duration of the contract in case the sponsor wasn't happy. And so then when it came to the renewal conversation, everybody kind of thought, God, yeah, we did well out of it, but I think we could have potentially got a little bit more out of it, and I'm not sure how or why. Well, I love how and why. So the idea was to create a forum which would be business led, and then which would bring sport on board as well, where we could, I'm probably still the only one who is writing about every sport, and from the angle of not what's happening in between the white lines, but what's happening beyond them, and focusing on disability sport, focusing on women's sport, focusing as well on the big sponsorship announcements, Vodafone extending with Irish Rugby, Bank of Ireland extending with Irish Rugby. We're probably the one media source that's covering those to the greater extent than any other. Now, we are niche, but that niche is beautiful when it comes to this sense. So the initial thought was to go to a number of different people that I knew within some of the, the bigger names and the bigger companies, and ask them, what do you think? And to a man and a woman, they said, yeah, look, I'm not quite sure how it'll look or how it'll work, but I like the idea and I like you, and we'll back you to get this off the ground. And it grew and it grew and it grew. Like we launched in the sort of the depths of the depression and the recession at a time when the financial masters were coming in to take over Ireland's economy. And we survived through a global pandemic that shut down sport for months on end. So I think at this stage we're okay, but I still think of it in a kind of a startup mode. I love the ability of working on ideas that might come to me in the middle of the night and might become really expressions of fact by 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock that morning. Not all of them work. If I knew the ideas that were going to crash and burn in advance, then that would save a lot of time. But I love the chance to find out. And like we work with almost 300 organizations now. The business model is membership. So, so everybody pays a little bit to, keep food on my table and keep me happy. And I just get to work with an incredibly diverse and talented group of people. And even though I still do all of the writing myself and I still want to be on top of all of these things, I kind of feel as though the Sport for Business workforce extends to those that know us in each of those 300 organizations. And that's a really privileged position to be in, that, KPMG and PwC and Bank of Ireland and Lidl and the GAA and the IRFU and the FAI and, badminton and AMSC, all of these great organizations that are trying to do the right thing, that are trying to deliver sport, whether it be through, promotion or whether it be through, coaching or whatever form and version of it is. It's the 364 days of the year that leads up to that 1 year. And we just kind of try and shine a spotlight on that and help with it. I'll never be satisfied. I'll never think that we've got to where we want to be. You've always got to be trying to improve. I love doing the events. We've got a sponsorship showcase next week. We've then got our annual Women in Sport event, which we ran the first of those back in 2013. So this is This is 10-year anniversary, and I'm bringing back some of the people that spoke then to reflect with them on how it's moved and changed. And we've got some great people, great speakers coming along to talk at that. I love bringing people together. I love sparking off conversations, and I'm very, very lucky. I love what I do.
Yeah, but you're also very good as well, and I think that's something whenever people say that, and I know Irish people, we don't particularly like that, but you are very, very good at what you do, and I think that you just need to name the brands you just named and the list and connections I had with you. It's fascinating for me to watch that growth, and again, from somebody who worked at Munster Rugby for such a long time, there was sometimes you'd get newsletters in and you'd be like, oh, I don't have time to read this. Very rarely did I not read yours, and I'd recommend anyone who's watching this to get involved with Sport for Business, because you said it right. You've got such a vast differentiation of sport. It's not just rugby or soccer or GAA or whatever. It's a vast array of it, and you were championing female sports, and that's something that some people are trying to do now and say they were involved at the start, but you definitely were. Credit
Thanks,
to you for that.
It's kind of, I get a great kick out of that. I get a great kick out of the fact when government ministers sort of say, oh yeah, no, I was really interested in that you wrote there, because sometimes when you're writing, you're never quite sure who the readership is. But I bumped into Desi Farrell, the Dublin GAA manager, who's always been a bit of a hero and a really, really great guy, away from what he does in football in so many different areas. And he said to me that over the last year, he's culled most of the emails that come into his box. And he put his hand on my shoulder and he says, but I keep yours. And I read yours every day. And, that makes you bounce when the alarm goes off early in the morning.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, when I was setting up AMSC, I'm only in my baby infancy, to have so many people actually say, yeah, I'll come on your vlog. I fully get a little buzz. It gives you a little feeling. It's a bit like when Doug Howlett, who was my boss for a while, when he knew my name back in the day. And I remember having to be very professional and saying, yes, Doug, I'll get you this, whatever. But internally, I was a little 5-year-old. Oh my God, this superstar who's the famous try scorer for New Zealand Rugby knows my name. He's probably watching this. He'll slag me for that. We have a last thing, which is a quick top 10. And it's just a quick top 10 questions that I ask. Just very basic. There's nothing to catch you out. It's tea or coffee kind of conversations. So they'll fly through. Some of them are quick to answer. Some of them you have to think about a little bit. So no problem either way. Right. Tea or coffee?
Oh, coffee. Lots of it.
Good answer. Netflix or the cinema?
The cinema, for the experience.
What's the last thing you saw in the cinema? Can you remember?
Oppenheimer, which was a very cinematic experience. Kind of the one that you really wanted to see on a giant screen with big noise.
Yeah, my wife's a massive Cillian Murphy fan, so I was brought that as well. Like, I was blown away by that whole experience. Is the right word. The best event you've ever been at. So the best event, that it can be sport, it can be anything. The one, when I said that, what's the one that came to your mind first?
The birth of my kids.
Do you know what? I've had 13 people on show so far, and I've asked that question to them, and I know of at least 10 of them who have kids. That's the first person to answer that question. So I'm delighted with that answer.
Oh, brownie points to Dad then.
Yeah, yes, very much so. The best stadium you've been at, the one that stands out the most to you.
Oh, they just keep on getting better and better. I love Croke Park. I love the Aviva Stadium. I love Park Equive. I was over at Tottenham Hotspur recently, and that is really next generation. If you were to build a stadium now in your back garden, that's the one that I'd be looking at as a model.
Yeah, I had Tony Davison on, who was involved in that whole process, and he was raving about it. Messi or Maradona?
Oh, Maradona, but it'd be very, very close. I loved the World Cup. I've got 3 Argentina jerseys up in my thing. When I was a kid, again, maybe it's something odd about this, but I was the kid who in 1974, I wanted Germany to beat Holland. And then in 1978, I wanted Argentina to beat Holland. And I think I was the only person in the Northern Hemisphere or the Western world that actually wanted that. But Argentina has always been special to me. I remember 86, and I got such joy out of watching them winning this time around. So that would be very, very close. But because I love history, I guess I'll go with Maradona.
Yeah, the 86 World Cup was my first real World Cup that I vividly remember, and I just was in awe of Diego Maradona. And what people nowadays don't realize, that he was getting kicked up and down the field, and he was still this absolute superstar. And I actually went out and bought a Subbuteo a packet, and people won't know what Subbuteo is. It's a Subbuteo packet with Argentina jerseys, and I just love the color of the jersey and the black shirt. It's pretty class.
One little sidebar on Subbuteo. QPR's Subbuteo code is 666, which is deeply, deeply worrying. And it is also, we share it with a German club, MSV Duisburg, who happen to be my favorite Bundesliga team. So yeah, Subbuteo, the culture of Subbuteo is something that needs to be explored.
I might even try to see if I can get something from Subbuteo on the show. A burger and chips or a Sunday roast?
Burger and chips on the way back from my game.
In Sweden, we have a thing called fika. And fika is when you get cake and coffee at 3 o'clock in the day. And no matter what you're doing, you could be with family, you could be with friends, you could be at work, you could be doing any of those things. You come together for fika. And it's a lovely little kind of community thing. So a fika or go to the pub?
Ooh, I like new things and I like new experiences. So I'm going to go with fika.
Lovely. Best thing you've ever seen on the football field, on the sports field?
Best thing I've ever seen. Oh my God. I would imagine almost impossible to answer. I think it would probably be, it would be very local. I always think that, you know, your club, the people that you've grown up with, whether as a player or as a coach or as a PRO or anything like that, I think those are important. And my local GAA club, we won the All-Ireland hurling championship a couple of years ago, the AIB club championship a couple of years ago. And that was great. But even that, because we won it at Croke Park, it was a little bit removed. So I would imagine, you know, maybe winning a, you know, minor or an under 16 championship. Yeah. A couple of those, though, you know, those things that are really personal. I always say to the teams, I say, never cry when you lose a game, because that's not right. But you're perfectly entitled to cry when you win a game. And yeah, I think I've cried a couple of times at games that are really close and personal.
Yeah, I that's a fantastic analogy. By the way, when Munster won I am the jinx of Munster rugby. By the way, you can put that on your thing. When I joined Munster 2 months previously, before I joined, they'd won the Magners League 3 months earlier. They won the Magners League, and I was there for nearly 12 years. They won nothing, and I left in May. I went in March, and 2 months later, they went on this massive run to win a URC title down in South Africa. So I'm literally, Philip Quinn, the COO, wouldn't let me into the building, I would say, if I was to go back there. But I vividly remember lying on the ground crying when they won. And it was crying because it wasn't just for the players. It was mainly for the staff who'd been there for so long and brands who'd been connected to it for so long. And there was such a massive connection to that. And I think what is amazing about that moment is that's the moment I remember, rather than the last minute tackle or the try or whatever. Yeah. It's that moment. I think that's what sport's all about. It's that passion and collective and link. It is exactly. One last one. What does a normal Sunday look like for you?
No such thing. There is no normal day in my life. Sport dominates, but not exclusively. I love reading. I would devour books, and I love really well written literature. You know, give me a Donal Ryan novel, and let me immerse myself in that. Would be great. This time of the year, the Red Zone on a Sunday evening is pretty special. I tend to have a busy life, so sometimes I'm like one of those really weird people. I'll watch the Red Zone on kind of 2 times speed, so that I can actually pick up on the bits that I want. Yeah, I need to see a psychiatrist in some way, shape, or form. But yeah, no, give me friends, family, little bit of sport, little bit of time to read a book. Thankfully, I don't sleep very much, and I've just always been very fortunate in that I've just never really needed sleep. So I've got sort of 19 or 20 hours every day, and if you could give me a magic gift, it would be to get another 4 hours into the day that I could actually fit something extra into it. But I'm lucky. It's really lucky. Like I thrive in it. I don't get tired. I'm healthy, happy, but thankfully I don't need to give over so much time to just lying there with my eyes closed.
I need to get you to talk to some of my kids, if I'm completely honest. Rob, this has been an absolute pleasure to have you on. It really has. I'll put all the details of where people can find you in the YouTube clip at the bottom. And again, it really has been an honor to have you on. It's a great conversation. And thank you so much for everything you've done for me, but also what you've done for the sports industry in Ireland. It's been massively appreciated. And look, I cannot wait to see what happens over the next 5, 10, 15 years for you.
Oh, well, thanks so much, Anthony, and the very best of luck. I remember what it was like when you're setting off on that journey, and it is the best of times, and there will be times when it can feel like the worst of times. But but every day will be a new opportunity to just sort of get it right. And the very best of luck to you and to everybody who's working in the sports industry that's watching this. It's a great series. There's been some great people onto it, and really enjoyed it, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what you can do over the next 10 or 15 years as well. So the best of luck, and thanks a million for giving me the chance to take a wander down the sort of the long and winding memory lane that I've built up now in the background.
Brilliant stuff. Thank you so much for your time, Rob. Look after yourself. Have a good day. Now that was brilliant. I've been looking forward to having Rob on for such a while and getting schedules together, and it's just amazing to sit down and talk to somebody with the passion that he has for sport, but also the knowledge and understanding that he took from it. There's some really interesting nuggets within there that I found from my side. First of all, his answer on that the birth of his kids, that's an embarrassment to any of the rest of the guests I've had before. So I'm making sure I'm going to text some of them and say that to them. But more importantly, it was his knowledge and understanding as to where everything sits within sport, and how he took the opportunity in 2011 and went out and spoke to the brands. But if you listen to the brands who he spoke with, it shows the knowledge that he had and the experience that he had, that those brands are willing to support and help him. And some of the events he's done has been amazing. But for me, one of the standouts, and I could be here for a while, but one of the main standouts is his promotion of women's sport. Sport for Business, when I was at Munster Rugby, it was very much, there was a lot of promotion within women's sports. It was something that I was very passionate about, having a very passionate female mother who's a supporter of sport and wife, and now I've got my young daughter as well. It's definitely something I was very honored to be. So I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. My music's going to kick me out. You can follow all the details at the bottom of the show. Thank you so much for everyone getting involved. Keep talking to me, keep getting me involved, and hopefully I can help you out again in the future. Look after yourself. Bye-bye now.